In this multi-million peso property dispute, the final outcome depends entirely on a procedural technicality, the specific courtroom door the plaintiffs walked through. The dispute involves two distinct Philippine entities, Salazar Realty Corporation, known as SARC, and Tacloban RAS Construction Corporation. Between 1992 and 1999, Tacloban RAS secured a series of loans from Metrobank, eventually reaching a final principal of 18.5 million Philippine pesos. To secure that 18.5 million, the parties looked to SARC. 5 parcels of real estate registered solely to SARC were pledged as collateral for the debt of Tacloban RAS. This arrangement led to a breakdown in corporate governance. SARC shareholders eventually discovered that 2 officers, Consuelo and Ralph Salazar, executed this mortgage without receiving valid authorization from the company. Under Section 40 of the Corporation Code, encumbering substantially all of a corporation's assets requires a formal meeting and explicit shareholder approval. The shareholders alleged this process was bypassed entirely. By alleging an ultra vires act, the shareholders are claiming that the mortgage violated the protective boundaries of the corporate entity itself. When Tacloban RAS defaulted on the loan, Metrobank initiated extrajudicial foreclosure proceedings against the 5 SARC-owned parcels. Metrobank emerged as the winning bidder. SARC's titles were canceled, and the bank consolidated ownership, receiving new certificates of title in its own name. Upon discovering the loss, shareholders Ramon, Robert, Roger, and Rosemarie filed a suit on SARC's behalf to quiet title and nullify the contracts. In paragraph 14, the shareholders list specific procedural errors during the foreclosure, including a lack of personal notice and defective publication. Their primary argument targets the foundation of the debt. The foreclosure is void because the original mortgage contract lacked board authorization. Metrobank responded with a procedural defense, filing a motion to dismiss based on the shareholder's standing and the court's jurisdiction. The bank argued that the petition was a derivative suit, which qualifies as an intra-corporate controversy, a matter that stays outside the jurisdiction of a regular regional trial court. This creates the central legal question. When a corporation sues an outside bank to recover its property, is the case a standard civil matter for a regular court, or an intra-corporate dispute meant for a specialized commercial docket? Under Section 23 of the Corporation Code, the power to sue and control assets belongs exclusively to the board of directors, acting as a collegial body. This creates a problem when the directors themselves are the ones accused of mismanagement. A board is unlikely to authorize a lawsuit against its own members, leaving the corporation helpless. The derivative suit provides an equitable exception to this rule. It allows minority shareholders to bypass the board and initiate a lawsuit in the name of the corporation to protect its rights. Because this bypasses normal corporate hierarchy, the 2001 Interim Rules of Procedure, or IRPIC, set strict requirements. The plaintiff must be a shareholder, they must have exhausted all internal remedies, and they must file specifically in the corporation's name. The SARC shareholders met these criteria. After board vacancies and the alleged unauthorized mortgage paralyzed normal company action, they stepped into SARC's shoes to sue. Despite this, the trial court denied Metrobank's motion, ruling the case was not an intra-corporate controversy because it involved an outside third-party bank. The court's reasoning overlooked a key point. A derivative suit is a procedural workaround specifically designed to fix a breakdown in internal corporate governance. When Metrobank appealed the ruling, the Court of Appeals applied its own analysis to the jurisdictional question. To evaluate the case, the appellate court used the historical 2-tier test to define whether an intra-corporate controversy existed. The relationship test requires the dispute to occur strictly between corporate insiders, such as stockholders, directors, or the corporation itself. The controversy test requires the dispute to be intrinsically connected to the internal regulation of the corporation, rather than standard civil issues. The appellate court concluded that because Metrobank is an outside entity with no internal ties to SARC, the case failed the relationship test. As a result, the court ruled the attempt to annul the mortgage was a purely civil matter that belonged in the regular trial court. The Supreme Court eventually reviewed this logic and determined that both lower courts were wrong to apply this test to a derivative suit. The lower courts focused on the target of the lawsuit, the bank and the property, rather than the procedural vehicle used to file it. In its final ruling, the Supreme Court overrode the lower court's reasoning. The court found that the two-tier test is irrelevant when determining if an action is a derivative suit. The court's logic was simple. The very act of instituting a derivative suit inherently proves the existence of an intra-corporate dispute. A minority shareholder only bypasses or on board when an internal failure of trust or governance has occurred. The presence of an external defendant like Metrobank is a secondary consequence of that primary internal conflict. SARC shareholders filed a valid derivative suit because the action was rooted in the alleged illegal authorization of the mortgage by their own corporate officers. You cannot separate the external lawsuit against the bank from the internal corporate failure that required the shareholders to file it in the first place. This raises the question of why earlier cases, like the ones used by the Court of Appeals, split jurisdiction based on third-party defendants. Before the year 2000, jurisdiction over intra-corporate disputes belonged exclusively to the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. The SEC was an administrative agency with specialized corporate knowledge, but it had no authority over standard civil matters like real estate titles and mortgages. This forced a compromise. The SEC handled the internal corporate conflict, while regular courts handled the recovery of the physical property. Section 5.2 of the Securities Regulation Code ended this separation of powers by transferring the SEC's judicial authority directly to the regional trial courts. With the SEC stripped of this power, the old rules splitting jurisdiction became inefficient and unnecessary. Following this transfer, the Supreme Court designated specific branches of the regional trial courts to serve as special commercial courts. Because these specialized branches are still courts of general jurisdiction, they can adjudicate both internal and external issues at the same time. A special commercial court can rule on the validity of SARC's board resolutions, while simultaneously deciding whether to nullify the Metrobank mortgage. Under the 2001 interim rules shown here, the old distinctions are gone. Item 4 explicitly adds derivative suits to the list of cases governed by special commercial courts. SARC's lawsuit survived the motion to dismiss, but the Supreme Court ordered its transfer to the correct special commercial court docket. The final lesson for corporate practitioners is clear. In modern litigation, the derivative suit itself dictates the jurisdiction, regardless of who is standing on the other side of the courtroom.